stranded in the storm. The windshield wipers struggled against the onslaught of rain, each swipe barely clearing Daniel Reeves's vision before the next wave of water crashed down. The coastal highway had transformed into a treacherous ribbon of reflective black, with visibility reduced to mere yards ahead. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the dense forest that pressed close to the road's edge. "Not now," Daniel muttered, as his Aston Martin's engine stuttered, then died completely. The luxury car rolled to a stop, its gleaming exterior now pelted mercilessly by the storm. He tried the ignition again, nothing but an impotent click. Pulling out his phone, he confirmed what he already suspected: no service. At 36, Daniel had built Horizon Technologies from nothing into a multi-million-dollar company. He navigated market crashes, outmaneuvered competitors, and weathered countless professional storms. Yet here he was, defeated by rain and a mechanical failure on a forgotten stretch of Maine coastline. A flash of headlights appeared in his rearview mirror. Daniel watched as an old blue pickup truck slowed and pulled up behind him. His city. Instincts warned caution, but his practical side knew he had few options. The truck's door opened, and a slender figure emerged, wrapped in a yellow raincoat. "Need help?" The voice was soft but clear above the drumming rain. A woman approached, hood pulled forward against the downpour. Daniel lowered his window just enough to speak. "Car died. Do you know any mechanics around here?" "In Briar Cove? Just one. Sam's garage." She glanced at the sky. "But he'll be closed now. Storm's supposed to get worse, too." Lightning cracked overhead as if emphasizing her point, followed by a boom of thunder that seemed to shake the ground. "I can give you a ride to town," she offered. "There's an inn that might have rooms." Daniel hesitated. His tailored suit and Italian leather shoes were hardly appropriate for dashing through torrential rain to climb into a stranger's truck. But another glance at the blackened sky made the decision for him. "Thank you," he said, grabbing his overnight bag from the passenger seat. The dash to her truck left him drenched despite the brief distance. Inside the cab, which smelled faintly of pine and paint, he turned to his rescuer as she removed her hood. Her face caught him by surprise, not conventionally beautiful but striking. Rain-dampened auburn hair framed features that seemed both delicate and determined, with eyes the color of the sea during calmer weather. She appeared to be in her early 30s, with a quiet composure that seemed at odds with the chaos of the storm outside. "I'm Eliza," she said, extending a hand. "Eliza Winters." "Daniel Reeves." Her handshake was firm but brief, her fingers slightly rough, working hands, not the manicured ones he typically encountered in his social circle. As Eliza drove, Daniel observed her profile. She handled the truck with quiet confidence, seemingly unperturbed by the weather that had reduced visibility to almost nothing. "You're not from around here," she stated, rather than asked. "That obvious?" Daniel managed a smile. "I was headed to a conference in Portland. Took the coastal route for the view." "Not much view today," she replied, her lips curving slightly. The truck's headlights cut through sheets of rain, eventually illuminating a wooden sign. "Welcome to Briar Cove, population 827. The small fishing village appeared through the downpour, weathered buildings huddled against the storm, warm lights glowing from windows. Eliza drove past a shuttered main street before turning onto a narrow lane that ended at a white clapboard house perched on a bluff overlooking what would be the ocean, though it was invisible now in the darkness and rain. "The inn's probably full with the fishing tournament this weekend," she said, pulling up to the house. "I have a spare room. You're welcome to stay until morning when Sam can look at your car." Daniel stared at her, then at the house. In his world, such an offer from a complete stranger would come with expectations or hidden agendas. "I don't want to impose," he said carefully. Eliza's gaze was direct, unembellished. "It's just a room for the night, Mr. Reeves. Sometimes in small towns we still help strangers." She opened her door. "But the choice is yours." Another lightning flash illuminated a studio space visible. Through large windows, canvases, and an easel, splashes of vibrant color contrasting with the gray world outside. Something about that glimpse of unexpected beauty made the decision for him. Daniel grabbed his bag and followed Eliza Winters into the storm, unaware that this detour would lead him far from the carefully mapped route of his life. Lingering questions. Morning arrived with gentle persistence, sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains and the distant rhythm of waves replacing the previous night's tempest. Daniel awoke disoriented, his hand instinctively reaching for his phone before memory returned. The breakdown, the storm, the quiet woman with sea-colored eyes who had offered shelter. The guest room was simple but comfortable. Whitewashed walls, adorned with watercolor seascapes, a patchwork quilt in blues and greens, and windows that framed a breathtaking view of the Atlantic. Daniel dressed quickly in the only casual clothes from his overnight bag, dark jeans and a light sweater that felt strangely formal in this rustic setting. Downstairs, he found the kitchen empty, but a note propped against a coffee pot. "Help yourself. Gone to arrange a tow for your car. E." A plate of homemade scones sat covered beside it. Daniel poured himself coffee and ventured outside onto a small deck that overlooked the water. The coastline stretched ruggedly in both directions, the morning sun transforming the ocean into a shimmering expanse that bore no resemblance to last night's fury. Beautiful, isn't it? He turned to find Eliza approaching along a path from the beach, her hair wind-blown and cheeks flushed. She carried a canvas bag that appeared heavy with collected objects. "It's spectacular," Daniel admitted. "Thank you for the coffee and breakfast." "Sam's sending a tow truck for your car," she said, setting her bag down. "But he warned it might take a few days for the parts. The storm knocked down some power lines on the main road, too." Daniel's immediate impulse was frustration. Meetings, to reschedule, calls to make, but something about the expansive horizon before him deflated his sense of urgency. "I guess I'm staying in Briar Cove a little longer than planned. The Seadrift Inn had a cancellation. I've reserved you a room." Her matter-of-factness was refreshing. No apologies for circumstances beyond control. No unnecessary small talk. "You're an artist," Daniel stated, remembering the studio glimpsed last night. A shadow of something, caution, passed briefly over her face. "Yes." "May I see your work?" The question seemed to surprise her. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. "I suppose so." The studio space occupied what might have once been a sunroom, with windows on 3 sides capturing both forest and ocean views. Canvases in various stages of completion lined the walls and rested on easels. Unlike the serene watercolors in the guest room, these paintings were bold, almost fierce, abstract renderings of water and sky in turbulent motion, colors both vibrant and dark intertwining. "These are remarkable," Daniel said, genuinely impressed. "You capture something. Primal." Eliza remained by the doorway, watching him with that same composed expression, though her fingers fidgeted slightly with the hem of her sweater. "The ocean doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is. I find that honest." "Do you sell your work?" "Sometimes. To a gallery in Portland. I don't need much." Daniel paused before a particularly striking canvas that seemed to capture the essence of last night's storm. "This reminds me of something." He leaned closer, examining the brushwork. "There was an exhibition in New York last year. Elements Unbound. The style is similar." The silence that followed was a beat too long. When Daniel turned, Eliza's face had composed itself, but not before he caught a flicker of alarm. "I've never exhibited in New York," she said evenly. Later that afternoon, after checking into the Seadrift Inn, a charming Victorian building overlooking the harbor, Daniel found himself returning to Eliza's reaction. As CEO of a tech company that specialized in security systems, he had developed an instinct for discerning truth from fabrication. Something about Eliza Winters didn't quite align. Over the next 2 days, Daniel found himself drawn into the rhythm of Briar Cove. He made necessary business calls from the inn's porch when the cell signal cooperated, but increasingly found himself walking the shoreline or exploring the village's modest offerings. A bookstore that doubled as a cafe, a general store that sold everything from fishing tackle to hand-knitted sweaters, and a small maritime museum housed in a former lighthouse keeper's cottage. And there was Eliza. Despite her initial reserve, she proved a knowledgeable guide, pointing out hidden tide pools and the best spot to watch seals at sunset. They shared meals at the village's only restaurant and conversations that flowed more easily with each passing day. She spoke with passion about marine conservation and local history, yet whenever the topic turned personal, she redirected with subtle skill. On the third evening, as they walked along the harbor after dinner, Daniel finally asked, "How long have you lived in Briar Cove?" "Almost 5 years now," she replied, watching a fisherman mend nets on his docked boat. "And before that?" Her pace slowed fractionally. "Various places, none worth mentioning. Everyone has a past, Eliza." Cracking facades, the call from Sam's garage came just as Daniel was finishing breakfast at the inn. Parts would be delayed another 2 days due to shipping issues from the storm. What should have been unwelcome news instead brought a sense of relief that surprised him. "Everything all right?" asked Marion, the inn's proprietor, as she refilled his coffee. "My car won't be ready for a couple more days," Daniel replied. Marion smiled knowingly. "That's the 3rd time I've seen someone look happy about car trouble this year." "First time it's been a man, though." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Just that Eliza doesn't usually spend this much time with visitors." She set down a basket of fresh muffins. "She keeps to herself mostly." "Good to see her opening up a little." After breakfast, Daniel headed toward the village library, housed in a former church with stained glass windows that cast colorful patterns across the worn wooden floors. The elderly librarian, delighted to assist someone new, helped him access the public computer terminal. While he had convinced himself this was merely curiosity, Daniel knew he was crossing a line as he searched for more information about Alexandra Reed. The results painted a picture of a meteoric rise in the art world 5 years ago, followed by a sudden, unexplained disappearance just before a major solo exhibition. The art community had speculated wildly: creative burnout, mental health issues, even death. But no concrete explanation had ever emerged. One article mentioned her background in environmental activism and legal studies before she turned to art full-time. Another referenced a high-profile corporate pollution case where she had played a pivotal role in bringing justice to affected communities. Daniel's heart rate quickened. The Alexandra Reed he remembered had been mentioned in connection with his brother James's case, the whistleblower whose testimony had helped send James to prison for environmental violations at Reeves Chemical. The family company Daniel had transformed into Horizon Technologies after the scandal. He closed the browser, suddenly uncomfortable with his investigation. If Eliza was indeed Alexandra, what was he doing in her town, in her life? Was this merely coincidence, or had she recognized his name from the beginning? That afternoon, they had planned to visit a nearby nature preserve. Daniel considered canceling, but found himself walking to their meeting point anyway, questions burning in his mind. Eliza waited by the trailhead, dressed in hiking boots and a light jacket, her hair tied back in a simple braid. Something in her expression shifted when she saw him, a momentary guardedness, before her features relaxed into a smile that didn't quite reach her. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't come," she said. "I considered it," Daniel admitted, his usual diplomatic facade temporarily abandoned. They walked in silence along the forest path, the tension between them palpable until they reached a clearing overlooking a secluded cove. "This is one of my favorite places to sketch," Eliza said, settling on a fallen log. "The light changes constantly, but the rocks remain the same. There's something reassuring about that permanence." Daniel remained standing, studying her profile. Permanence isn't something I'd associate with you, Alexandra. The name hung in the air between them. Eliza's body went still, only her eyes moving to meet his. How long have you known? Her voice was quiet but steady. I suspected since you showed me your studio. I confirmed it this morning. Daniel sat beside her, maintaining distance. What I don't understand is why you're here, living under a different name. Or if you knew who I was when you stopped to help me. I had no idea who you were in the rain, she said, her gaze returning to the ocean. When you introduced yourself. Yes, I recognize the name. I almost took you to the inn instead, but the storm was too dangerous. And you didn't think to mention our connection? A bitter laugh escaped her. And what would I say? Welcome to my home. By the way, I'm the woman who helped put your brother in prison. The bluntness of her words hit Daniel like a physical blow. James had died in prison 2 years into his 7-year sentence, an untreated infection that had turned septic. The family company had been dismantled, their reputation destroyed. Daniel had rebuilt his life from those ashes, but the wound remained. Why did you leave New York? He asked, voice tight with controlled emotion. Guilt? Eliza's face hardened. I left because I received death threats after your brother's sentencing. Someone leaked my address. My studio was vandalized. Environmental terrorists spray-painted on my door. Her hands twisted in her lap. I never testified for publicity or acclaim. I did it because people were dying from contaminated water. Children with rare cancers, miscarriages, wildlife disappearing. James wasn't responsible for those decisions, Daniel said. He was the scapegoat for our father's policies. I know that now. Her voice had dropped almost to a whisper. But I didn't then. Daniel stared at her. What do you mean? Eliza rose, walking to the edge of the clearing. For several moments, she simply gazed out at the water, her back to him, shoulders tense. 6 months after the trial, I received an anonymous package, she finally said. Internal documents proving your father had overridden James's safety protocols, then altered records to implicate him when the investigation began. She turned to face Daniel, her expression raw with remembered pain. I took the evidence to the prosecutor, but without knowing the source, they couldn't act on it. By then, the appeals process had ended. Your brother was already serving his sentence. Daniel felt the ground shift beneath him. For years, he had harbored a quiet suspicion that his father had been more culpable than James, but he'd never found proof. Why didn't you go public with the information? He demanded. I tried. Eliza's eyes flashed with sudden intensity. 3 different journalists. All received pressure to drop the story. Your father had powerful friends. Her voice broke slightly. When I persisted, the threats escalated. My apartment was broken into. My cat was killed, left on my bed. She wrapped her arms around herself, the composed woman he'd come to know suddenly vulnerable. So I disappeared. Became Eliza Winters. Started painting the only thing that still made sense. The raw, uncontrollable force of nature. Daniel stood frozen, his carefully constructed narrative about his family, about her, crumbling. The woman before him was simultaneously Alexandra Reed, the witness he'd quietly resented for years, and Eliza Winters, the enigmatic artist who had shown him kindness when he was stranded. I should go, he said finally, turning back toward the path. Daniel, her voice stopped him. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I only wanted the truth to matter. He looked back at her, standing small but unbowed against the vast backdrop of sea and sky. The truth, he said quietly, is rarely what we think it is. As Daniel walked away, leaving her alone in the clearing, he felt as though he were abandoning something essential. But he needed space to process this revelation, to reconcile the woman he was beginning to care for with the complicated history that connected them. Back at the inn, a message waited. His car would be ready tomorrow morning. The timing seemed fitting. Whatever had brought him to Briar Cove, chance or fate, it was clear he had stayed long enough to unearth truths that perhaps should have remained buried. The truth surfaces. The Seadrift Inn's wooden porch creaked beneath Daniel's restless pacing. Though his room offered comfortable shelter from the night's chill, its walls had begun to feel confining as his thoughts churned relentlessly. The moon cast silver ribbons across the harbor waters, boats gently rocking with the tide's rhythm. Sleep had eluded him entirely. The revelation of Eliza's true identity and her unexpected connection to his family's darkest chapter had shattered his equilibrium. His brother James had been the family's conscience, the one who questioned their father's cutting of corners at Reeves Chemical. When the scandal broke, their father had presented James as the sole architect of the company's environmental violations. Daniel, focused on damage control, had never fully investigated those claims. Had he been complicit in his brother's unjust fate through his silence? By morning, Daniel had made his decision. Before leaving Briar Cove, he needed the full truth, not just for closure, but because something fundamental had shifted within him during his days in this coastal village. Something that made the prospect of returning to his carefully constructed life in the city suddenly hollow. He found Marion in the inn's kitchen, kneading dough for the day's bread. Need to see those documents that came to Eliza, Alexandra, after my brother's trial, he explained after sharing a condensed version of their connection. Marion wiped flour from her hands, her expression thoughtful. That explains a few things. But Daniel, she guards her privacy fiercely. After what you've told me, I understand why. I'm not leaving until I see those documents, he said quietly. James deserved better. From our father. From me. From all of us who read the headlines and believed them, Marion added gently. Her cottage studio is where she goes when troubled. Try there first. The morning air carried a hint of approaching autumn as Daniel followed the familiar path to Eliza's home. The cottage appeared deserted, but smoke curled from the chimney of a small outbuilding set back among the pines. The door stood partially open, and through it Daniel could see Eliza, Alexandra, working furiously at a large canvas, her brush strokes aggressive, almost violent. Weathering the storm, together. 6 months later, rain lashed against the windows of Daniel's apartment in Boston, the weather a fitting backdrop to the storm they had deliberately unleashed upon the world. On the television, muted now, talking heads dissected the latest developments in what the media had dubbed the Reeves revelation, the case that had exposed corporate corruption, environmental negligence, and the wrongful conviction of James Reeves. Daniel watched Eliza as she stood by the windows, her silhouette outlined against the gray day. She wore one of his shirts, her hair loose around her shoulders, a stark contrast to the polished appearance she had maintained throughout the press conferences and interviews of recent weeks. Any regrets? He asked, joining her at the window. She leaned back against his chest as his arms encircled her waist. About us? Never. About stepping back into the spotlight? Sometimes hourly on bad days. The journey had not been easy. With the help of Daniel's contacts and resources, they had carefully built a case that could not be ignored or suppressed. The documents provided the foundation, but it was Eliza's decision to reclaim her identity as Alexandra Reed that had given the story its emotional weight. Her public statement, acknowledging her role in James's conviction while revealing the evidence that had later come to light, had captured national attention. Daniel's father, confronted with irrefutable evidence of his actions, had suffered a stroke before he could be formally charged. He now resided in an expensive care facility, unable to speak, a fate that sometimes struck Daniel as both too harsh and not harsh enough. The state attorney's office called, Daniel said, pressing a kiss to Eliza's temple. They're officially moving to posthumously exonerate James. The governor plans to issue a formal apology next week. Eliza turned in his arms, her eyes bright with unshed tears. That would have meant everything to him. I think he knows, Daniel said softly. Wherever he is. Their relationship had deepened through the crucible of the past months, strengthened by the challenges they faced together. From that first passionate night in her studio to navigating the media frenzy that followed their revelations, they had formed a partnership that balanced Daniel's strategic mind with Eliza's unwavering moral compass. There had been costs. Some of Daniel's business associates had distanced themselves, uncomfortable with his role in exposing corporate malfeasance. Eliza had received both acclaim and criticism, praised for her courage in coming forward, yet questioned about why she hadn't pursued the truth more aggressively years earlier. But there had been unexpected rewards as well. Daniel's company had emerged with its reputation enhanced, positioning itself as a leader in corporate accountability. Eliza's art had found a new audience. Her recent exhibition, a series exploring themes of truth, justice, and redemption, selling out within days. Most significantly, the communities affected by Reeves' chemical would finally receive the compensation and medical support they deserved through a fund Daniel had established using his personal fortune. "I received an interesting offer today," Eliza said, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingertips. "The Environmental Law Center wants me to head a new whistleblower protection program. They think my unique perspective would be valuable." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "In Boston? They have offices here." "I could split my time between advocacy work and painting," she hesitated, "if that's something you'd want." "Are you asking if I want you to stay?" Daniel took her face gently between his hands. "Eliza, Alexandra, whoever you choose to be, I want you in my life, permanently." Their lips met in a kiss that still held the wonder of new discovery alongside the comfort of deepening familiarity. When they separated, Eliza led him to the bedroom they now shared, the rain providing a soundtrack to their unhurried exploration of each other's bodies, a physical affirmation of the trust they had built. Afterward, as they lay tangled in sheets, Eliza's head pillowed on his chest, Daniel voiced the thought that had been forming for weeks. "I've been thinking about Briar Cove," he said, his fingers combing gently through her hair. "About your cottage on the bluff. What about it?" "I miss it. The peace there. The perspective." He chose his next words carefully. "My lease here is up next month." Eliza raised her head, studying his face with those perceptive, sea-colored eyes. "Are you saying you want to move to Briar Cove? What about Horizon Technologies?" "I've been working on restructuring the company. Employee ownership, with a board of directors handling day-to-day operations." Daniel traced the curve of her shoulder. "I'd maintain a role as advisor, but not CEO. The company doesn't need me there physically anymore." And what would Daniel Reeves do in a village of 827 people? There was curiosity in her tone, but also a hopeful note she couldn't quite disguise. "I thought I might write that book about ethical business practices I've been talking about." He smiled. "And there's this environmental foundation I'm establishing in James's name that will need attention. Plus, I hear there's a talented artist in town who might appreciate having someone to make her coffee while she paints." Eliza laughed, the sound unfettered in a way it hadn't been when they first met. "You'd be bored within a month. With you?" "Never." His expression grew more serious. "The past 6 months have taught me what matters, Eliza. It's not the corner office or the industry acclaim. It's waking up next to someone who challenges me to be better. It's making amends where possible and having the courage to build something new when it's not." Rain continued to drum against the windows as they discussed possibilities. Renovating the cottage to include office space for Daniel, converting the garage into a larger studio for Eliza, finding ways to benefit Briar Cove without changing its essential character. As afternoon faded to evening, they moved to the kitchen, preparing dinner together with the comfortable synchronicity they had developed. The news played in the background, a brief mention of their case appearing before moving on to other stories. "It's strange," Eliza reflected, chopping vegetables with practiced ease. "For years, I defined myself by what happened, first as the whistleblower, then as the person who got it wrong. I never imagined having a future not shadowed by that case. And now?" She smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. "Now I'm thinking about paint colors for our expanded studio and whether Marion will expect us to bring dessert to the monthly town dinner." Daniel pulled her close, vegetables momentarily forgotten. "I love you," he said simply. "Both versions of you?" "All versions of you. Even the version that's going to insist you learn to sail properly if you're going to live on the coast?" Her eyes sparkled with mischief, especially that version. He kissed her lightly, though I reserve the right to complain dramatically when I inevitably fall overboard. As night settled over the city, They stood once more by the windows, watching lightning illuminate the skyline. The storm that had first brought them together had long passed, but its effects continued to ripple through their lives, washing away pretense, creating space for something genuine to take root and grow. In the morning, they would face more questions, more decisions about how to balance justice with healing, public responsibility with private happiness. But for now, in this moment of quiet intimacy, they had found their harbor. Two people who had seen each other at their most vulnerable and chosen to build something stronger together than either could have created alone. "Do you believe in fate?" Eliza asked softly, her reflection mingling with his in the rain-streaked glass. Daniel considered the improbable series of events that had brought them to this point. A broken-down car, a storm, a woman with the courage to stop for a stranger. "I believe," he said, "in second chances, and in making the most of them when they come." Outside, the storm began to ease, the space between lightning and thunder growing longer. Tomorrow would bring sunshine, clear skies, a new day in which to continue the work of redemption they had begun together.